one-dimensional heat transfer, but also temperature is a function of time. So how to approach for solution of this kind of problem, and it's very easy to solve in MATLAB, and we will little bit discuss about the methods, the algorithm that is used behind this PDE solution. So after that we will move to the neural network modeling, artificial neural network modeling using for feed-forward neural network. So these are our topics in today's class. Okay, let me share my screen so that we can discuss. Okay, so let us see that this is the nature of the equation. Del t, del t. So this is the unsteady term, and this is that the conductive equation along with this alpha. So alpha is basically the k by rho Cp. So for the value of 2, we are just going to solve this kind of equation. So let us now see the type of boundary conditions. Okay, so we are aware of those two type of boundary conditions which are commonly used in chemical engineering applications. One is Dirichlet boundary condition, and one is, I think, Neumann boundary condition. So here we are seeing both the type of boundary conditions. So this is the Neumann type, and these are Dirichlet type, and this is the initial condition. So there are now three conditions. This because this unsteady term where time is our independent variable, so temperature will evolve, or temperature will gradually change as the time progresses. So initial time must be given. So what is at initial time, what is the temperature? And sorry, I think this is the initial condition. I put it wrongly. This is the initial condition. And this is the Dirichlet condition. Okay, so with this, basically this equation is also kind of looks as a non-dimensionalized equation, um, and therefore it's going to easy to solve. So let us first see the uh, kind of we can say the approach, and then how to do it easily in MATLAB, that we will discuss. Okay, so this kind of partial differential equation are solved in general by the use of finite difference method. So there is a method called method of lines. Okay, method of lines. So what is method of lines? So we just divide the domain of space. So spatial direct domain, we divide it into several number of grid points. So it sounds like familiar we last class discussion about the collocation points. So here we are going to divide the whole space into several of the grid points. We call this each of this point as a grid point, right? And then we are going to basically write the temperature in this grid point. That means we want to expand this del square t del x square term with the help of finite difference method as 3 point Newton's forward difference formula. So what we are going to write, so basically in general, in uh, overall, what is the temperature, which is a function of both x and time. Now by specifying the temperature at each of these grid point, what we are essentially trying to do, that we are trying to make it as discrete discrete temperature at the grid point. So that's also a method of discretization. In partial differential equation solving, we often come across this term called discretization. So therefore, by doing that discretization, we no longer remain in the same position. That means temperature is now only a function of time, because we are specifying the values of temperature at each of the grid point, at each of the grid point. So that means now as the time evolves, as the time increases, progresses, we are going to see how the temperature at each of the grid point varies. So this whole differential equation that we have written here, so how does it look like then? Del t, okay, and then temperature, which is now a function of xi and time, okay, this is now equals to d. So therefore it is no longer a del, it is just a function of time. So by doing this, what we are advantage we are getting, we are making this PDE into a several system of ODEs, initial value problem. And the main reason of transferring from this PDE boundary conditions or combination of boundary condition and initial condition to just fully ordinary differential equation system with initial value problem. So we convert the problem from PDE boundary value initial value problem to ODE IVP initial value problem. Now the main reason of converting or transferring from one to another is that for ODE IVP, the system is well developed. That means rather method of solutions where basically you have several integration subroutines available, not only for non-stiff problem but also for stiff problem. So wide variety of solution is available, whereas in partial differential equation there are solution available, but oftentimes it is restricted. We come across problem, and therefore this kind of approach is very easy, that we convert that each of these system of equations, or rather each of these PDE into several system of ODE. So by doing this, what we are will be getting, let's say we start with in general what we will write, we will write that dti dt equals to alpha t I plus 1 minus 2ti plus ti minus 1 by delta x square. Now what is this delta x? Delta x is just the grid size or spacing between two grid points. Okay, this is very important and crucial parameter, this grid size or grid spacing. As you refine the mesh size, that means as you smaller the distance, that means as you take the delta x lower and lower, the solutions will improve, the accuracy of the solution will improve, but at the cost of higher time, higher computational time. And oftentimes, if you go smaller of this delta x, you will have run into problem, as the problem will become more stiff. How? So now if you look at the expression, the nature, it is basically an ordinary differential equation, and which is basically I is a running variable where you can vary as per the different grid points. So you will have several ODE equation. Now if you notice the right hand side of the ODE, it's just a algebraic term. So in previous we also encountered that this kind of homogeneous ordinary differential equation where dy dx, where y is nothing but a vector, and we had noted down in the form of this matrix. A is that coefficient matrix of that ordinary differential equation system, right hand side. So this coefficient matrix can have its eigenvalue, and this eigenvalue can, as we have learned that there are if the eigenvalue of the coefficient matrix of the ordinary differential equation system are widely varying, that means one is at very small and one is at very large, that means the problem is a stiff. And if you remember that stiffness number, we have defined that highest by the smallest. So if it goes of the order of 10,000s or million, then we can easily call that problem to be a stiff nature problem. So this converting from PDE to ODE is definitely an advantage, but at the same time we have to be careful about what method we are choosing for solving and what is the delta x, because delta x we have to take smaller, we cannot take larger just to avoid the time or make the problem as non-stiff. We should be taking delta x smaller so that accuracy of the solution improves, and by doing that, even if it goes to a stiff problem, but we have the routines, subroutines, so we can tackle the problem accordingly. So this is the general approach that is taken in MATLAB, and by doing it, not only we convert the main system into differential equations ODE, but also we convert the boundary conditions. So each of the boundary conditions, so for the grid point 1, the first grid point, so rather the t0, if you call it 0 ith, and this is n, or y1 equal to 1 to n plus 1, whichever way. So t0 and tn, these are specified, right? And or rather tn is not specified, tn is specified, but t0 is basically x equals to 0, it is the derivative. So this you have to also break into ti minus 1, ti plus 1 minus ti minus 1 by 2 delta x, like that. So in this way, what you will do, you will convert the boundary conditions into algebraic equations, and therefore this type of equations are also called as differential algebraic equations. Algebraic equation is also called because it is coming due to the nature of boundary conditions, Dirichlet or Neumann. So it's a differential algebraic equations, which is often noted as DAE. So generally this is the way we call or we do this kind of problem. So one approach is directly you can do it by MATLAB functions that we will discuss now, or you can simply first do an analytically, you can transfer this problem by this kind of approach to ODE IVP, and then you model the then you actually go for solutions by solving the several system equations using standard ODE technique, IVP technique. So the second method, or the method that is used in MATLAB, so as I written here, the MATLAB can also solve PDE in of the form. So it is a general notation. Okay, so this form of notation, and actually our problem fits into this kind of generalization approach. So let us see what are the terms that is present, which is the meaning of this each term. So you can see here that C is a function, can be constant, can be a function of x, t, u, or del u, del x. So these are our main, this is the kind of temperature you can consider. T and X are always there, and first derivative of temperature. So C can be constant or this kind of function of this, and this, so it is the second derivative. So the del X of this, the whole term. So here most of the term are constant. In order to get these equations, we will see later on that f must be 2 dt dx. 2 is because alpha equals to 2, so it is basically some constant. So as I said, f and you can see here that f could be a function of x, t, u, or del u del x. So here it is 2 dt dx, and outside there is also del x term, so to make it del square t del x square plus s. So s can be, you can consider as a additional what we called kind of a heat generation term if it is there in the system. Unsteady state heat transfer problem, but at the same time heat is generated in the wall or some heat source coming from outside. Yeah. So that term can also be present. So it is a general statement, and this can this can be reduced, or this can be simplified for to get these expressions. So here you can see that there is one coefficient which is m, which defines the geometry of the problem, whether you are tackling a planar geometry or cylindrical or spherical, right? So this is the general statement, and for our problem it is this m equals to 0, and then we and as we can see here that the coefficient, there is nothing left hand side at del t, so c we consider as 1. So knowing this, now we will go to the different type of MATLAB functions file definitions. So what are different MATLAB function file definition? So one is the trans temp. So it is just written as one of functions name as it is typically given in the function. You can give a different name also. So it is just the differential equations. Now the advantage is that you don't have to write everything in the MATLAB part, at least for this PDE problem, because if it follows this kind of general approach, or your equation is of the form of this, then you can just have to specify the different term C, S, F like this. Okay, and then initial condition is also given, so which we have specified here. So this is the main system of equations, the functional calculations of the PDE. This is the initial condition, and this is the boundary conditions. So boundary conditions can be of, as we have seen here, that can be Dirichlet or can be Neumann. So this is the general line for the boundary condition, and here as again our boundary conditions was given that at x equals to 0, that at starting grid point the del t del x, the flux is 0. So that has to be also fitted or falls into this general category statement or general approach. So here we have to define what is P and what is Q. Now we have the boundary at x equals to 0 and x equals to 1. So we have to define P and Q for x equals to 0 and x equals to 1. What is P, what is Q? So as we can see here that one of the term will be 0 and one will be 1 for left and right accordingly, in order to match these two type of boundary condition. So these numbers you have to specify, and in the what is called this MATLAB function file. So one for boundary condition, one for initial condition, and one for system of equations. So these three are our major input in the MATLAB what is called functions or main script. Now what is left? That is X mesh and T span. So what is X mesh? X mesh is basically the all the grid points containing the domain, spatial domain. Okay, so that is our X mesh. And what is t-span? T-span is basically the whole time that we have. So what we have done, we have just linearly divided the whole span of time and distance into this several grid point, 11 grid points, and then we are looking for the solutions. So the solution is like this. We call the solver called PDEPE, and this is the major or other main solver that is available in MATLAB for solving partial differential equation of this kind. Okay. So now we can do or we can see the results in two different form. Either we can go for a 3D plot like this, okay, temperature as a function of length and time, or we can go a line plot. So this often called a surface plot. That means both it looks as a two coordinate, as the temperature is depending on both length and time. So this kind of plot is called surface plot, or we can also go a line plot. So if we just have to do a surface plot, then MATLAB can easily do that. We just have to write surf and X mesh, T span and T, because solution is there in this T. So temperature is there in this solution form, and it is just capturing the data, or it is just recording, or not recording, it is just mentioning the solution data of the y values for all the positions and all the time. So first one was X, second one was time. So now what we have done, so in the line plot, what we can do for all the time, we can see the temperature at each grid point. So the second column refers to the time, and the first column is just the at individual grid point. So that's where we can also plot. So this plot line itself will give us the line plot, and that we have written as X level, X and Y level temperature. So for different grid points, we will be getting the what is called temperature distribution as a line plot. So as a this kind of 2D plotter basically. You can also do in the other way, maybe time and temperature and as a function of X, but that one has to try, and probably just changing the notation from here, semicolon will be here and then 1 2 like that. So you can try it out. So this is the general way of solving this kind of PD into MATLAB, and yeah, so which I wanted to cover, and as a part of this model development and model solutions. So this was the last in this series, and next we will be going to a different topic. So are there any questions over here in this today's concept that we have discussed? Any question? Okay, if not, then we move to a different topic. Okay, so today we will be starting a new topic called neural network modeling technique. Before we start it, we will want to have a broad idea about what this type of modeling technique is all about in general. So do you have any idea about neural network modeling? Aditya Jha, Abhilash Sinha, Jyotiraditya,
Yes, sir.
do you have idea about neural network modeling technique?
So not that much, but I have basic idea like the
Can you
recurrence
say
neural
something?
network. Uh, like it is basically based on learning of a particular data set on a particular data set. We perform more and more learning operations so that if a similar data set is like encountered, so we can produce similar results as we have encountered earlier.
Okay, 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 okay. Thank you, thank you. Let me see if others are. Pratik Korane, not present. Rishabh Kumar, Sahil Bairagi,
Yes, sir. I also have a slight idea about how the process goes.
can you just briefly mention that? It would be good for us for discussion.
Yes, sir. So I know that there are multiple layers of, let's say, neurons that are
Mhm.
interconnected by weights and biases, and we change those biases over iterations to fit the data set.
Good, good. Have you run any calculations?
I have done a few of the neural network modeling, but I'm not very good.
Okay, okay, okay. We will do one sample problem examples, and then also exercises we will try to have. Thank you, Sahil. Let me go to one more. Okay, who will tell? Vivek, Sureka, not present. Varun Balakrishna, okay. Rushi Girish,
Yes, sir.
do you have idea about artificial neural network or in general this neural network
Yes,
modeling?
sir. Actually, we here a model, construct a network made from neuron, which are having some sort of parameters, learning parameters, which are learned by training the model by some data set,
Mhm.
and we test that model on some another data set and check their efficiency or accuracy.
That's nice, nice. So at least more or less, and many of you are familiar with this method. But the reason I wanted to involve or rather include this rather in the syllabus or in the course topic is as follows. So currently there are huge trends, and we once again kind of revisiting the neural network modeling technique approach in our conventional chemical engineering or let's say on the traditional engineering subjects. We earlier is this neural network modeling is not new. The question is rather historical perspective. If you look at, you will find that it was originated in the year of 1943, so it is not new. So that is the first thing that we have to keep in mind. Only thing is that by the several, I mean, when it actually originated, and after that it was mainly restricted to computers and electricals. So these are the branches which used this technique as a one of the modeling technique, or you can call as predictive modeling toolbox, predictive modeling technique. So, but now people are seeing the advantage of using that technique in other side of engineering or other domains like conventional chemical engineering or mechanical or civil. So wherever you have the this kind of predictive modeling task is required, or some kind of unknowns, given an input or model, as the model must be very robust kind of model, and you must be able to predict output with a maximum accuracy, or with the predictive power is high, with a high predictive power. So again, it's the use has become evident, and we will see in one example in subsequent class that vapor liquid equilibrium data, mm, that are oftentimes difficult to obtain at high pressure condition. So at high pressure conditions, performing experiments or getting experimental data is difficult, and we rely on our this technique called neural network modeling technique. So there are examples, and already research is going on, and research output are available. So we will take up one example, one such examples to see the application of this technique in our VLE data chart preparations, or for some system at high pressure condition. Okay, so this some characteristics of this neural network based model is that we, as you have pointed out, many of you, that it learns from the data, learning based model. Now this learning is something very interesting. Hmm. It not only the so we will see in detail. Okay, we will not explaining now, we will see in detail what is learning. We have taken one examples, we have solved step by step. So step by step algorithm discussions will be there. So it's basically a learning based model. Who will learn? The model itself will learn. So unlike the previous type of problem, when we had this physics was known, that means the governing phenomena. So we knew that unsteady state reactor, we know that concentration and temperature will vary with time, and for a CSTR we can write down the mass balance equations, governing equations based on boundary conditions, or not boundary, the initial conditions we can solve. So it's almost like for the previous kind of model, process model, uh, we had the models developed, or we had the models with us, and then we looked for a integration time, or we look for the, as in let's say the plug flow reactor, we look for the different length, how the concentration varies. So it's almost like we had done, we had kind of made our journey in those kind of modeling technique, from developing a model to generating data. So it is model to data. But here in this neural network kind of modeling, we just go in the reverse directions. We are given with loads data, several class of data, several features, and then one is asking us that can you tell us, or can you give us that what model or what architecture. So that model is nothing but derived from the neural network architecture. So we will see in detail about the structure of that architecture or neural network, and generally the evolutions or the inspiration comes from our human mind, human brain, is that it is several neurons are interconnected each together, and the basic functions of neuron are like this. We have our biological some idea about there was is a neuron, and then it sends the signal into another neuron or cell body or cell another cell to via this axon. So this axon, we will see, this is nothing but resembling the weights of the neuron. So this again there are receivers or receptors called synapses, and at the other side it is called dendrites. So this is general structure as we have studied in our biology. So the generally this neuron task is that it processes the signal, incoming signal from its previous neuron, and then sends the signal to the next neuron. So it is that similar functions we will have in our neural network based modeling, that in across each layer what is going on, and ultimately it tries to capture the huge non-linearity in the data set. So the data set can be, in general we write X and Y as we are familiar to see that this is the input and this is the output, but it just not the single data set. In the X we can have many different type of data set. Even in the Y we may not have just a single output, we can have multiple output. So it is basically creating or developing a relationship between the multiple input and multiple output. So essentially we try to generate the model from the data, just the opposite way. So several input, several output, this is important. Predictive in nature we have discussed, and essentially we are trying to capture the inherent nonlinearity in the data. So generally these are the ideas or applications which I am not going through. You can read it and understand. So now I will be going to the mainly architecture part, and then we will take that examples to discuss about the step by step. So what we are essentially going to do here is as follows. We can have multiple hidden layer, or we can have a single hidden layer. Now, what is the need of this hidden layer? Can anyone say? We can have easily input and output, just like linear regression. We can make a regression line and we can make the coefficients available. We can, so regression line is also basically linear regression, or non-linear regression is also a model line or model equations, right? Essentially, we are trying to get the model equation in the form of graph, either linear or non-linear, and then given a range of again input, we try to predict the what will be the y. So can anyone suggest or can anyone comment that what is the need of these several hidden layers, or one hidden layer, at least some hidden layer? What we do here?
Sir, to tackle the non-linearities.
Very good. Who said it?
It was me, sir, Tejas.
Very good. Very good. So the very general, very in purpose, the very purpose of introducing hidden layer is that we are trying to kind of knowledgeable. We are trying to make the model knowledgeable enough. We are trying to make the model recognizes the pattern or the trend or other interconnections, the mapping between the input and output data. It may require one hidden layer will be sufficient. It may happen that several hidden layers are sufficient. Now in the hidden layers, we again have the neuron structure. And this is very important that we have to include more number of neurons in the hidden layer. Just to because you have the data set in your input layer. So in most of the time in the input layer, you don't have a single features. You have multiple features of data. So we will see the examples right now. So this multiple nature of the data set in the input layer requires that you should include the maximum possible, or rather the more and more neuron in the hidden layer. It can unfold or it can reveal the essentially the underlying nonlinearity in the data. So we just try to recognize, we just try to make our model understand that the data are nonlinear in nature, and in order to create a relationship between input and output, we need to understand that what are the different neurons, how they are receiving signal and like that. Okay, so each of these neurons are basically receiving signal and transferring signal. So at the input layer, we do not do any processing in the nodes. Sometimes it is called nodes or neuron. Okay, node or neuron. So in the input layer, we just feed the data. So these are our different feed data input. Okay, and then each of these inputs are multiplied with the weights. That means the information is almost carried over from this node to this node. So it's almost like each of these informations, rather U1 are sent over all the nodes. Similarly, U2 will be sent to all other nodes like that. So in this way, we almost like cover all the weights or all the input data in all of the nodes or neuron in the hidden layer to process it, so that it can start its operations by making the weights converting the data set into another layer into another data. So so basically it goes on like this. This is the step-by-step process. We will just see how it is being done. So let us see that this particular data set is something like this. It's very small, but just to introduce and just to do the step-by-step calculations, I had introduced this. Okay, let's say this some students number. So this x1, x2, x3, these are basically your input. This is your input. This is your output. So we can construct a simple layer network, which is called one hidden layer or two-layer network. So this is your input layer, this is your hidden layer, and this is the final output layer. So as many number of outputs we are trying to get. So since this was one output, so one nodes or one neuron in the output layer. Here it was 3 input. So it was 3 node in the input layer. Now what is happening? So we just define initially. So we randomize. It is called randomization. So it is basically just we give the initial weights. We start with some weight values. That means this x1, this input is now sent to both the nodes. This is also sent to both the nodes like this. So in this way we have 3 and we are sending to 2. So we have 6 weights or carrying. These weights are carrying the informations from this to this, and then this particular node is trying to do 2 kind of process. Each of this node in the hidden layer. So the mainly it does one linear operation and one non-linear operation. So this summation sign is doing the linear operation, and then integration is just doing the non-linear. So here it introduces the non-linearity in the data. Okay, so there are methods, or there are many advanced methods or techniques to change these nonlinear functions. We call activation functions. We will see. So first we have defined the weights, and then this is also the bias, some another parameter. So major important parameter in our model is weights and bias. So this is some lines are written that if nonlinear relationship between input and output exists, then we need some kind of nonlinear operations in the network model, so that we allow our data model to learn, or we allow our model to understand that there are nonlinearity in the data. So we have to introduce some nonlinear technique or operations or features in our models training method, that it can capture the inherent or underlying nonlinearity in the data. So in each node, we are doing two operations. One is linear and one is non-linear. Okay. So let us see what is doing. So basically the central idea is to extract the linear combination of the inputs as derived features, and then the model the target as a nonlinear function of this feature. So that means we have our input data, that means these numbers. What we are doing, we are just combining them, and then we are almost like creating another feature. So at the point when it enters here, and the summation operation is being done, that means another feature or another version of the data is reflected, right? So we call this as derived feature, and then the model the target as a nonlinear function of this feature. So target means this output that we are trying to predict, though we have an output available, but we want to develop the model by training method, by training the data. So we have to compare how our model is good. So first we need some data set for training purpose, and then we will try to test our model, or rather validate our model with some unknown data set. That means a data set which the model has not seen it earlier during training. So this process is now shown here, that we have just taken the first row data 6085. That means we are just doing the step-by-step calculations with this data set. Okay. So initially we have given a weight of 1.1. So this is the upper node. So W1, W3, W5. That means this node we are talking about right now, B1. So this and then B1. So then Z1, which is basically the we have just again broken the node or neuron into two parts, as if the linear part and non-linear part. So linear part is taking informations. So at this point we are just summing up all the weights and biases. So this is this, and then output is the Z1, which act as an input in the nonlinear functions, and then the nonlinear functions, after that there is output that goes to this final output layer multiplied by the weights and bias. So everywhere these weights and bias are our major element in the model, because these are the information carrying carrier. Informations means the after each node it processes some operations. Input layer gives the data, hidden layer neuron processes it to introduce nonlinearity, and then the weights are the carrier. These are the carrier of the informations from node to node, or hidden layer node to final output layer node. Now there are different kind of activation function, nonlinear activation functions. We call activation functions. It's almost like we are trying to activate the or rather introduce the nonlinearity, the model. So there are different type of activation functions, where most often the activation functions that is used is called sigmoid functions or logistic functions. So it looks like this. So it has sufficient nonlinearity in the nature. There are could be other. One is tan hyperbolic, and one is something called rectified linear unit. Though the detail are not covered here, but typically it looks like this. And then it like goes like this. So this is the rectified linear unit. Then you have the sigmoid functions, which is this. And then you have the tan hyperbolic. So one can try with different activation functions and check the model performance. So, well, one questions I have made here, that how to set weight and bias. This question will again be encountered at the later, and kind of this is the main or one of the major questions that we ask in this discussion. that how to set weight and bias. Initially, the first we have to do it random number generation. So weights and bias are initially decided as randomly, and we take those to calculate the first hand operations, and then we update, or rather update means we try to kind of optimize the parameter values so that we get the minimum error in our predictions. So what we have done till so far is just the one new node operations we have learned, and we have seen that different kind of activation functions will result into different numbers. So G1, which is the output from this node, is something 0.37. If you take a different activation functions, it will be different. Similarly, we will get G2, that means this bottom node. This is the information that is coming from here is G2. And then what is going on here is that final output layer, we have just the summation part. We have just assembled all the informations from its previous nodes. So previous node means output are G1 and G2, and then we had two carrier, the weights, and we had one bias. So output layer is one node, and then for Y predicted, we have calculated to be 24.95. So in this way, we have calculated from, or rather we have calculated from our weights and bias the Y predicted values, YP. So this operation is called one pass operations from input to Y predicted. We call forward operations. So one is name is given as feed forward neural network. So that means feed, that means inputs are processed from the left to right, the forward directions, and it's a feed forward going towards product, going towards output, predicted output. So based on weights and bias, we have processed our data to predict some Y. But what about the comparison? What about its comparison with the actual Y? True Y. So we can see here the actual Y was 82, but we have landed up with 24.95. So that means that it is not correct, or rather it is not good. Not saying by correct, but this model performance is not good. So that means it is understood that W and B, the values we had taken, were not correct. So there must be some measures, there must be some way to make them correct. So then we introduce something called back propagations. Something called back propagation. So initial direction was this, and then we are going to these directions. So if this direction was to give you the Y predicted, this direction will tell you that what W and B you have to take. Okay. So what we are doing here is that we have to understand that for W and B we have to take. So then we introduce a term called cost function or error function or loss function. It has many names you will find across the study material, that either we call them as cost function or error function or loss function. So what is that functions definition? How do we define it? So cost function is defined as the difference between the Y, that means Y predicted minus Y actual, and square. Square is being done because it can be sometimes more than actual value and more less than actual value. So if you make a square, then it is a positive number. Okay, so now what we are doing essentially that since we have to update or we have to change, we cannot take the same W and B value for all other data set, or we have seen that it is not performing well, so we have to correct them. So the one way to correct them is to call as a technique called gradient descent method. Gradient descent method. So it is a minimization algorithm So what does it do? That it move along the negative direction of the slope of a cost function until it find a minimum value. So it's almost like in the landscape of that minimization or global minimum, the concept of global minimum. So we have to move to the negative direction of the slope of the cost function. So that means there is something called cost functions, and then we have to calculate the slope of the cost functions. So that means we have to take a derivative. So derivative with respect to what? There is the major point is that the derivative with respect to the weights. Now weights of just 7 and 8, because it is associated with the output layer? No, weights of all the weights and biases. So that means you have 1, 2, so how many? 8 weights and 3 bias. So 11. So with respect to all these 11 parameters, you have to calculate the derivatives or slopes. So there, this calculation is the major chunk of calculations, and we will see just for these examples we have done actually for all, and we will. So basically, first, what is that weight? It is the W7s. So with respect to W7, we will calculate the del cost del W7. So directly can we do that? No, because cost function has just the predicted and actual, right? So del cost del y pred into del y pred by del W7. So it's basically the chain rule we have introduced, and in all these calculations, we just nothing but have to introduce chain rule of calculus differentiation everywhere to update all the weights or to get the new value of W's. Similarly, del cost del W8 is like this. Just you can calculate and check on your own because the data sets are given. Similarly, del cost del B3. So for this part, this weights and bias, these are calculated. So this is the calculations, derivative calculations. But are we able to update it? No. So this is very important. Update, because it can give you many important consequences. What is it? Walk down the cost function in the direction of the negative partial derivative, negative direction of the slope, by taking small steps. Generally, we are aware of that smaller the steps, better the general equation solving ordinary differences, smaller step size gives better accuracy, but at the cost of higher time. So something called learning rate. This is another important parameter. So if weight and biases are the as important as in the model parameter weights and bias, then this eta, that is learning rate, that is also a very equally important parameter. This almost like dictates or governs the optimization routine or this minimization, or rather training the neural network. So how do we calculate then? So the updated value of W7 is the previous value of W7 minus, in the negative direction we are moving, eta del cost del W7. So this is, we have just taken as 0.01. We will talk about learning rate and comment on this at the end. So hold on for that. So what are the implications of learning rate? So this is very important. Just like weight and bias, this learning rate is also very important parameter. So initially we have just taken as 0.01 and we have updated the weights. We have got W7. Similarly, we can get W8, B3 like that. So for all the weights and biases, we have to do this. That means we have to do for W1, W3, W4, 5, 6, all. So this side we have done, but this side it is left. But with respect to what? Again, the same cost functions. So with respect to cost functions, we have to calculate all the updates. For all the updates, for all the weights and biases, we have to use the same cost functions. Because that is almost like interconnected or inherent in this whole modeling. So cost function can all the way is connected with the W1 because input is carried over with the W1, gone into this linear part, which has calculated and gave the process as output to the nonlinear part, that it has again activated it. So all the way the input is information along with W1 is all the way related to cost function, Y predicted. So it has gone to the Y predicted in the forward direction, feed forward directions. We have seen that it goes to the all the way to the Y predicted. So let us see how do we calculate del cost del W1. See, manually or analytically you don't have to do it, but you have to know what is going on in the calculations. So that is why I introduced this topic, and also in the step-by-step calculations will be very efficient or very easy for you to understand. So del cost del W1 is nothing but del cost del Y predict, because cost function is as a function of Y predicted. Now Y predicted is also a function of G1, right? In the forward direction calculations, we have seen that Y predicted is the linear summation of this, isn't it? So Y predicted is a function of G1. Not only G1, but G2 and G3 also, B3 also. So basically we're a function of all this. So but G1 is there. G1 came from the first node or top node. So del cost and so this is this derivative calculation is required, and then G1 is also related to W1. That is why. So essentially this derivative is calculated by multiplication of these individual derivatives. Chain rule. Again, that's the concept of chain rule. Now again, G1 and W1 are not directly related. Why? Because it has also done two operations in hand. So one is so basically W1 we can call as related to Z1. Z1 is related to W1, and Z1 is also fed as input to this nonlinear part where G1 is the output. So del G1 del Z1 was related. So that's why we introduced, or rather we have further broken down this del Z1 del W1, because we are trying to calculate the del Z1 with respect to this, but both of them do not know each other. These are known, W1 Z1, and they are known. So again we have broken down and we have done this. Okay. So in this way, that means this is basically a sum multiplication of 4 individual derivative quantity, right? Del cost del W1 is nothing but the multiplication of these 4 individual derivative quantity. So in this way we have noted down the terms, and you can see it. There was one this thing that del Z1 del Z1 was like this, because if you take a derivative of del Z1 del Z1, then it will come this way. I think it will come multiplication. So yeah, del Z1 del Z1 will give you the form which can be simplified to look like this, and this is written as G1 into 1 minus 0. Okay. So in this way we can update the W1, not only W1, W2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even B1 and B2. So that means this side of this neuron, all the parameters including weights and biases. So this we have updated, right? This we have updated, and what we are getting. So that means, is this all, that updating the weights a single time is all? No, we are not finished yet. We have just in fact started. So, but this makes one complete pass. This updating updating the weights and biases in the network, starting from the output layer to the input layer, because we are moving back propagation. So that makes a pass complete, or single training. This is important. Single training example from the dataset. So just one dataset has been used, and this much calculations are involved. Now you have loads of data. So each and every time this is being done, this is being carried out. So this complete pass has two major chunks. One was forward direction movement and one was backward propagations. But it says that we are not finished yet. We have training examples too with the new weights and bias. That means now with the first data, we have updated the weight and bias that we are going to use for the second. From this again, the weight and biases will be updated because we will compare the true and predicted. Then the third will be used for updating. Even that also, that one time use of first, second, third data set is not enough. So sometimes it will give you the close value. You find that y predicted minus y actual. So this difference or model training part for training data set, how the training is going on, or whether the multiple time of updating, because you have to do multiple time of updates, weights and bias. So by doing that, you are checking the performance by mean absolute error or root mean square error. So sometimes you will get low value and you will think that we have to stop the training, but it is not. It is not. So what we are doing is multiple time of training, and when we have actually entire data, entire training examples at least once. That means, as I said, this whole data set just has been used once to update the weight and bias. So this time using the first we will update, second we will also update, another update, third. So three data set, three times update and updating the weights and biases. So one time use of the complete training data set is called an epoch. Okay, so this is the terminology you will find out in neural network modeling technique, that once, at least once, if we have used the training examples 1, 2, 3 to update the weight and bias, that is called epoch. Okay. Now the next line you read, it is very important, that it may take many epochs to fully train a neural network. It may take many epochs to fully train a neural network. So that's what further it gives us the kind of questions or generate questions to us, is that first, as we will start with this question, that how large should be the learning rate, or how small, or what should be the desired value of the learning rate. This is very important. Second questions that we are trying to ask is, what about different type of nonlinear activation functions? Though we have plotted other types, but we can of course different. This question can be asked, that what are the different type of nonlinear activation functions. Generally, we give the initial values of weight and bias as random number generations. How do we know that when to stop training the neural network? Of course, one general sense, it says that when there will be no change, that means the error value is minimum. For multiple, as I said, that you need many epochs to fully train a model. So after successive epochs, or after successive this training, you may find that after sufficient number of epoch, then the error is not changing. So if suddenly you encounter a low value of error, and then you will think that we will stop the training, but in the very subsequent step the error may shoot up. So it goes like this. So multiple times it check the error, and then finally it land up with the, so it is basically down the hill it goes until it finds a minimum. Until it finds a minimum. Okay. And what about the testing of our model? So the model developed, it will be used for some part of the data set. So here we are just taking smaller example, but in general we divide it like 70% and 30%. Major part will be used for training, and the remaining part will be used for testing. Okay, so commenting about and in the testing part, we often get under predicted or over predicted. So this will comment on the next week about what is under predicted data, or underfit, or what is overfit. We that we will discuss about it in the next week example. So today we will end this class by commenting on the different type of learning rate. So here we have used as a constant learning rate, right? 0.01, this value. Okay, learning rate is constant as it is here. So generally, what the way we choose the learning rate as this, that qualitatively we have plotted with many different type of learning rate. Qualitatively we have written very high or high, low, or good. So what do they mean? So in general, we are trying to calculate we are trying to see how the error is behaving with the number of epochs. That is the essential task. So error or loss. Okay. Now, if you start with a very low learning rate, then of course the error functions will fall down, the loss will fall down, but it will not fall ultimately, or so to speak, we actually want the loss or error to be close to 0. Okay, that is ideally we would like to have, or rather that will be counted as the best model or best performance. But taking a low value of the learning rate will give you the gradual decrease of the loss, but not at the very high extent, or not at the very suitable extent, so that the error reaches to 0. It will lower down, but it will not lower down as close to as 0. So this is a very slow. This low learning rate will make your many epoch calculations, as you can see here, that it is not still close to 0. It can further go ahead, but by this time probably it has crossed many epochs. So this low value of learning rate is sometimes not accurate, not good. If you take very high learning rate, initially you may see that the loss functions falls down very quickly. You are changing your weights and biases, and in the very first few epoch calculations, you will find that loss is rapidly falling, and you will expect that this high learning rate probably will be useful. But then after some time, it will almost like remain as flat. It will plateau. So this much error is always there. So no matter how many epoch you calculate, loss will not further decrease. Okay, almost like a saturation. So the high learning rate is also not good. Very high learning rate is further bad, because in the first few run you will see that loss function is falling, then it starts increasing. So you are further away from your predicted and true data. So error loss is increasing more. So this is absolutely not required, or we should not take very high. Even high we do not take. So in general we take either low value. Now the good one, the best one, the actual one will be the one which is comes with a kind of or that particular learning rate where it essentially falls with a sufficient pace, that it over a certain number of epoch calculation it reaches to 0, or at least close to 0, very close to 0. So that learning rate, it's called something called learning rate schedule. So we just cannot simply take a learning rate of constant. So there are different functional applications of learning rate called learning rate decay, or sometimes we take that after 30 epoch calculations, a learning rate drops by 10%. So this is one approach. Every 30 epoch calculations, learning rate further drops by 10. So further lowering, and then we probably reach to the best one, or the loss function or error function goes to 0. There can be cosine function. There can be cosine functions like this. We give an initial learning rate and then we give the time, because this time is nothing but the progress, and capital T is the number of epoch. So it is basically the period, the cycle, T pi by tau. So we can give a cosine function, and because the cosine function, that half of the cosine function's shape is like this, because if you plot the sinusoidal, this nature of this cosine function, you will see that right hand half is like this. So ideally we would like to mimic that. Ideally we would like to get this kind of behavior of the loss with respect to epoch. So we are trying to mimic that, and therefore we are giving this kind of cosine learning rate schedule. So alpha t, which is the schedule of the learning rate values, is a function of initial learning rate and the number of epoch and time progress. So that error functions almost comes zero after a certain number of epoch calculation. Another learning rate could be linear. Of course, there could be a linear learning rate as well. There can be inverse square root. So each of them has different form. So based on one, you have to see which one is suitable for your data set, and this is how the learning rate should be chosen, so that the loss functions after a certain number of epoch calculation comes to a zero. Otherwise, one cannot do an infinite number of epoch calculations, or one cannot wait sufficiently so long time to get your model ready. So that is how it is influencing the calculations and model performance. And learning rate is one important parameter which we have learned here. So, and other questions we have made it or we have made available. We must go through them, and in the next class we would try to see the testing part or validation part mainly. So underfit and overfit will be commented or will be discussed, and then the VLE examples, paper liquid equilibrium examples, that we will be discussing in the, or rather we will be showing how this feed forward neural network using back propagation algorithm is helpful for one of the major applications, that is VLE data predictions at high pressure. So this is our next class agenda. So if you have any questions over today's class, this discussion, let us have few questions. Subham Kumar. Siddhant. Ankit Verma. Adarsh Kumar. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
So no question from your side? Hopefully you have understood. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. We call it a day. We meet next week, Monday.